Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Harry Brailsford coming to you from the Seattle area with SMB Nation. This is the final class for fall semester. It goes very quick. We've had 6 classes. This is the 6th class, and we'll be back winter quarter. Next year, we cut over to a quarterly system, so we're changing our academic calendar. Before we get into the topic today, want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So a couple of FYIs. If by chance you're in the Bay Area, I think I have time for a beer next Tuesday night out by SFO Airport. And then I am off to Orlando to join Solar Winds on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then I'm back and I will be at Office 365, aka SharePoint Saturday at Microsoft Redmond on Saturday the 28th. Love to see you there. That's free, by the way. There is a free lunch. And then finally, November 2nd in New Jersey, New York with Channel Pro. So hope to see you out on the road, gang. It's the busy fall season. Boy, howdy. Couple of new post-ups up on SMB Nation on screen number 2. Don't read while we're doing the webinar, but if you want to queue it up, got a coverage of the Continuum Navigate Conference and some other good stuff. With that said, let's use the questions feature to ask your questions. Now, with that said, we have Jamison West is back. And Jamison, hello, how are you? And where are you, sir?
Hi, Harry. I am well. I am in Las Vegas. It is a new type of fall to me. I was at the doctor yesterday, asked me if I wanted a flu shot, and I said it's not flu season yet because it's 85 degrees outside, but apparently it is flu season. So it's all new to me. The sun's out, and I'm enjoying Las Vegas.
There you go, my friend. Okay, well, you have last time we talked about some of the transitions you've made from a successful MSP who grew strategically. In fact, maybe I'll let you introduce yourself and do the talking. There's some people here that don't know Jamison West. Let's jump into it, my friend. Then we're going to hear from Fortinet and AppRiver. So, Jamison, as you know, we try to operate quite frankly like public radio and public TV, and we provide academic content, but it's the generous underwriting of our sponsors that allow us to be on the air. So thank you, Jamison. Let's get going.
Certainly. So I'm going to jump right in, make a little introduction of myself. I'm the CEO of Teamatics. We are a software company very focused on helping organizations understand what their skill gaps are. That's what we're going to be focused on today, and really talking about competency frameworks, how to manage it, and hopefully we have some good conversation. Please, looking for questions today to help ensure that I'm providing content that's helpful for everybody. I launched my IT services business in Seattle, born and raised in Washington State, moved to Seattle, go to the University of Washington in the late 80s. Launched my IT consulting business in 95. Very, very involved in Microsoft, very focused on Microsoft Cloud. I do cloud consulting and speaking for IT service providers to help them make the transition. Also plays very much into what we'll be talking about today in terms of understanding skill gaps for today and tomorrow, because everyone in the tech industry, or even in an industry where they rely on internal technical competency, is understanding the difficulty in finding talent and growing talent from within, which is just a tremendous focus. And in my focus, if pivoting to a pure cloud-based managed service provider, we went through a significant transition in terms of understanding the skill sets we needed internally. Ultimately, I sold the managed services business early last year in 2016. Spent a year working with the new company, Aldridge, wonderful folks out of Houston. Spent a year on that integration effort, and then ultimately left the company after a year doing that early at the very beginning of 2017 this year. And my wife said, "Get me out of the rain." So that's why I'm now in Las Vegas, and I actually had a Yeah,
Hey,
jump in.
James, you know me, James. I'm gonna interrupt you all day long, but
By all
sir,
means.
it is a fall rainy day with wet leaves, and you know what that means at street corners with those street gates. But please continue, my friend. Please continue.
Yeah, I enjoy kind of pestering people on Facebook that are complaining about the weather already. So it's been really interesting to be down here, and I just look forward to the opportunity to chat with everybody today. And I think I'll just jump right in.
Yes,
So
sir.
our focus today is around people. So what a very common thing for me to run into, I'm going to kind of frame it this way, is I understand my personal portfolio, my asset, right? My assets might be my business, my bank accounts, my retirement savings, real estate, whatever. And I utilize resources to help me understand that asset and quantify it. I can quantify it to the penny. I can balance it at the end of every month, and I can strategically shift where my resources are based on my risk tolerance or anything else. That's how I think about my portfolio or my current set of assets. When we talk to organizations, they tend to recognize that their primary asset is their people. Yet, when I ask them, what are they paying for? What's that paycheck going out for? It's for their skills. And I ask them to quantify that asset. Can you balance it? Do you understand what you're paying for? And it tends to be a resounding no coming back. Is this we understand it in a somewhat subjective way. We understand that we have talented people in particularly small organizations, sub 10 people. The owner may say, well, for the most part, yeah, I got it in my head. But you quickly begin to outgrow that. And I would argue that even in relatively small organizations, it's very difficult to understand not only the skills of your individual people, but their passions, where they desire to learn and grow. And that's what we're really going to be focused on today is understanding what your company needs, understanding what you actually have, and then learning how to close that gap. So I believe we have, Jenny, some poll questions that you're going to queue up.
Well, Jamison, you've got the right person on the job. There's nothing more solid than Jenny in the radio control room, my friend. And here's the poll. I'll go ahead and read it. Have you clearly defined the roles and skills required to carry your business forward? Folks, while you're answering that, again, shout out to the Continuum Navigate blog I just posted this morning, because, Jamison, that's a business speak blog, which is why we're here today, right? We're not here for geek speak. We're here for business speak. So, folks, at your leisure, but not while Jamison's talking. Jenny, let's go ahead and close the poll, because that was just a yes/no. And the results, I'll go ahead and read those. The question is, have you clearly defined the roles and skills required to carry your business forward? 68% no, 32% yes. Jamison, back to you, my friend, if you want to take over the screen.
Yeah, we're going to have two more poll questions coming up pretty quickly. That's very interesting. It's great to hear a third, frankly, higher than I expected, a third of the folks saying that they do clearly understand the roles and skills to carry the business forward. I think that that's going to play into a little bit into our conversation today.
Okay.
So that's great. We frankly hear typically, even in relatively large and mature organizations, a much smaller percentage that say yes, they've clearly defined that. So that's great. Let's go ahead and move on to the second question here.
Sure, and I'll read it, folks. It's been on your screen, so I'm assuming you've started to answer. And the question is, do you feel that your team members have the skills required to keep the business successful? It's from 1, low confidence, to 5, extremely confident. Chinny, let's count to 10 and then go ahead and move on from that. That's been on the screen for a couple minutes, which is a couple seconds. We're moving on. And Jamison, the results are, oh my goodness, it's a bell curve. So if you can imagine at the far end, 1, low confidence, 3%, At the high end, number 5, extremely confident, 17%. And then Jamison, it's literally the classic bell curve right in the middle. Number 3 at 29%, number 4 at 31%. Boy, howdy. I gotta love math.
Yep, absolutely. It tends to work out that way, and that's good. I mean, we tend to see, so that low confidence score, as a matter of fact, again, a little bit more of a shift here today towards some positivity around that level of confidence. Sure. That's great to see. Again, anecdotally, what you tend to see in the industry is there's some lack of confidence in both what people believe they need and what they feel that they have. So it's nice to see that at a midpoint. Then finally, let's jump into that third.
Okay, yeah, we're at the third poll. How well do you understand the skills and passions of your team members? That's been up for a few seconds. I'll make a comment back on the last observation that also, Jamison, it helps that the polls are anonymous, and so people can answer more freely. It makes a difference in how people
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, fair enough. Jenny, go ahead and close this one out, and I'll go ahead and read it. Number 1, no idea, at 0%, all the way to number 5. I clearly tracked this at 10%. Jamison, essentially a bell curve. Actually looks a little bit like a camel, but number 4 was 45%, followed by 3, 21, and 2, 24.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead, Jamison.
Great. Okay, so that's very helpful. I appreciate everybody taking the time to provide some feedback. When we look around the universe of these types of questions, we understand that we see the world of disruption. I'm going to give a little example here while you see some of these quotes on the screen, some of these facts on the screen. Disruptive technology, let's think back in the world of Amazon. It took Amazon roughly 10 years through their technology to really disrupt retail. Of course, we saw it well on the path in less than that time frame, but it was literally a 10-year disruption model. And now we look at Uber and we see something like a 3-year disruption model. We've literally cut technology disruption down by a third in a mere decade. We understand, and it's crystal clear as more research comes out and lack of ability, you hear people in the IT services business who are looking for more competencies and skills. It is hard to find the talent because our cheese is moving faster than it ever has, and this is a real issue, and people are concerned with both hiring the right talent and growing the right talent internally. But often what we see is with all the tools around, let's go hire somebody, let's try some training programs. We see these attempts to improve the skills of our workforce by either upskilling or acquiring. The issue is often that they haven't done a strategic analysis of what they actually need for today and tomorrow. And that's what we're going to spend some time talking about. And it all starts by really understanding what's core to your company. Understanding your mission, your vision, your values is kind of core to understanding what is the strategy for accomplishing your mission. And your values are the guidelines by which the rules by which you're going to play that game, right? So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. Everybody understands this, but it begins to dictate the type of people that you need in your organization. I'm going to set the vision aside for a minute, really focus on mission and values. Mission tends to be a little more near term. What are we doing and trying to accomplish today? And values is a bit around, so it touches very much in how are we going to act in the way that we try to accomplish that mission. And you can narrow down pretty quickly out of your mission and values a set of competencies or skills that are going to be your guiding light towards the type of people you need in your company to be successful. So we start to understand when we think from the top down, how are we going to be successful as an organization, and are we properly structured to do it? We begin thinking in terms of what in HR speak is called a competency framework. Some of you might be familiar with that terminology, but I'm going to jump into it a little bit more. A competency framework is basically, it's an exercise where an organization reviews their mission, their values. They really take a close look at the specific tasks that they're attempting to be successful at today. And it's literally going through your org chart. It potentially involves a reorg of sorts, understanding what your departments are in your organization, what your key teams are, moving your most critical teams higher up in the org chart, doing things to really optimize your workflow. And then the competency framework is layering over the top of that. What are the competencies or skills, or we can call them a number of different things. What are the competencies, capabilities, and skills that are required throughout the entire organization, within each department? Are we structured correctly to be successful? So I'm going to jump into that a little bit more. Oftentimes we start with organizational core values to build a competency framework. So let's say we have a core value around customer service. We can measure or we can track and measure and say, a part of our competency framework is that we want as a core value for every individual in our organization to have a high level of customer centricity. And so we might start there. We can look at our values and begin to build things that we want to understand throughout our organization. We may also be in a specific vertical that requires some industry-specific skills. I put, for example, autonomous driving technology. There's an interesting study that came out recently looking at jobs. LinkedIn, they track, obviously, a primary source for a lot of this data. They see how many people are looking for jobs that require specific skill, and then how many people have been tagged as having this skill. And it is shocking for the number of jobs that are available for folks who have autonomous driving technology competency, and the lack of people who've been tagged with any kind of related skill. That's again a massive shift in how technology is requiring a different set of competencies. The next thing we might do is jump into each department. You may have a financial team. Well, they're going to have some competency requirements. You're going to want to understand what everybody on that team needs to be successful. It may be budgeting and planning. It may be more tactical than that. It may also be your engineering or your technical team. You may use a specific type of software. You may work on VMware or Azure or a specific platform. You want to understand your capabilities and skills throughout that department. I want to be clear, when we talk about capabilities and competencies or capabilities, they can be made up of hard and soft skills. So oftentimes when we see an IT company, for example, think in terms of the skills of their people. They're extremely focused on the hard skills around the technologies that they support. I want to know how strong somebody is at, Windows Server, Office 365, VMware. But multiple times we've talked to organizations that are crystal clear. It's the soft skills that really build their success. It's going back to that values piece. It's customer centricity, authenticity. It could be around work ethic. It could be around all of these soft skills that really they're indicators of success. There's the more innate talents rather than the learned skills. And then finally, what are cross-department roles and capabilities that need to be considered? By that we mean, our first approach here was top-down. What do we need in the company? What do we need in each department? What do we need in each team? And now we can look horizontally. You may have a technical department, and then you may have a customer service team, but each of them have a project manager, for instance. So a cross-department role might be, the ability to manage a project well. Great. Let's understand what that role is, what that capability is, and what the individual skills are to be successful in that role. And essentially what you've done is you've built a matrix to lay over your organization with clarity around what the skills are and competencies are within every team, and even granularly down to every single role in the organization. The hardest part is to start to think about how those requirements change over time. My approach to that, when I had my MSP and we started to grow, when we hit 40 staff, I always created a functional org chart and layered in that skills or competency matrix in two ways. I had today's functional org chart, and I had a functional org chart for a year or 2 years out, with an understanding of how much we expected to grow and the competencies that be required to be successful based on our trajectory and strategic trajectory. Specific to our industry, I was extremely focused on cloud. So while we had, this is an explicit example of where we saw this need. Internally, we had, as an MSP, a significant competency requirement for network and infrastructure engineering, senior network and infrastructure engineers. But 2 years out, that requirement saw a significant shift. Massively reduced requirement for network engineering and virtually no requirement for infrastructure engineers. But a very increased requirement as we focused on VCIO level consulting, business intelligence, and more cloud-based activities. And so we could start to understand how we needed to transition the skills of our people and be strategic about who we needed to grow, how we needed to grow, who we needed to hire to be ahead of that curve. So that is the development of a competency framework. That's what it looks like, and now I want to kind of turn it back over to you, Harry. See if we have any questions before I move on to the next slide yet.
Yeah, let me look. Jamison, we don't, which doesn't surprise me. That's not bad. This is a business speak conversation, and it addresses softer skills, and I get that. Folks, you're always welcome to ask questions. Jamison, at midpoint, bottom of the hour, we're going to hear from Fortinet, so let me know when you're ready for that. We're still a few minutes out, but just a heads up. Folks, again, please use your questions. But Jamison, I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
And that is, in your new world with your new company, how do you make money? Seriously, how do you make money? Because I can't believe you're running around volunteering all the time.
Yeah, well, I've always done a fair amount of that, by the way. But so two ways, really. My time is spent doing two things. You know, my focus when I had shifted away from the cloud business was to really go into cloud consulting for IT service providers. And now through folks like you, I did a previous session on exactly that topic. It's become a one-to-many exercise, and I don't charge for that. It's just been something that I've tried to grow and just really get the word out there on a one-to-many perspective. And folks like you who help do that, it's been incredible. The way I make money in terms of Teamatics, the company, my partner and I, we've built a platform to manage exactly what the topic is today. Folks who are doing just a technical skills matrix in an IT environment, for example, is just a small part of the picture. It's those soft skills, it's understanding the entire competency framework and strategically getting ahead of the game that was so critical for me, and it's really lacking in the industry. And so that's the platform we built, was a way to manage that.
Okay, so please continue, and then we'll hear from Fortinet in just a little while.
I'll pop right over for you right now without questions. Let's just jump into Fortinet right now, and then we'll come back.
Okay, sounds good. So Farzad, my main man, are you out there?
Yes, sir. Yes, Harry. And I gotta say, I'm excited to meet you in person next week.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. And Farzad, if you could help me out, my friend, by the way, I've had one humdinger of a week. Are we showing the NFL video today, or what is your pleasure? Because it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
That we're showing the NFL video today.
Okay. Well, why don't you and I talk for a minute, and then we'll bring the video up. And boy, howdy, I'm glad Seattle's getting a little time off. The Seahawks, but let's not go there.
I'm a Niners fan right here.
But no, you and I are going to get together next week in the Bay Area. That's part of my trip, and I guess for the purposes of this conversation, what I want to emphasize is that's the SMB Nation way. That's what community is. I'm a big believer in quarterly business reviews, getting together with the people that sponsor the community, find out what you think of the community, how can you be a better community citizen, how can we do a better job for you. And it's not too far afield from what Jamison is talking about today, right? I mean, we're running a business here. And you've been very nice. You indicated off the air you have a favorite restaurant. I'm probably going to take you up on that. With that said, let's jump into the video. Folks, if you could pay attention to screen 1 for the Fortinet video, it is football season. Let's do it. Jenny, Jamison. And, you'll need to use your computer speakers for the video. Computer speakers. Thank you. There we go. We're coming back in. Jamison, if you want to go ahead and move us forward, my friend. Can you hear me, Jamison?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me all right?
I can. We have a quick poll up. So folks, before Jamison gets going, if you don't mind, please answer. Do you offer security services and products as a significant part of your business? That would be yes, no, I don't know. We'll take a couple seconds to answer that one. Thank you. And be sure, folks, to use the questions feature. I realize the nature of today's conversation is a little bit different, a little bit more thought leadership, if you will, but if you have questions, please answer them. Okay, let's close the poll, Jenny, and get back to Jamison.
Excellent. So
let's see, Jamison, can you double check your screen, please, my friend?
Yes. Is it not? It's not showing. Let me just double check that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Let's just make sure that it's
there.
working.
There we go.
Okay,
yep, we're
perfect.
Back.
We're back.
Thank you,
okay,
Jamison.
Great. Absolutely. Thanks for letting me know. So what I covered before the break there was really understanding the skills that are required and the competency required for your company today and tomorrow. That's your competency framework. The next step is understanding your workforce. And there are a lot of tools. We've seen a lot of assessments. We've seen a lot of ways that people begin to understand the skills of their people. But I want to really iterate here why the first stage is so important. You need to understand not just any skill that anybody on your team has. That can all be helpful data. You want to understand the skills that are relevant to your organization. So that's why phase 1 is really about what does your organization need today, what does it need tomorrow, and now we start taking a look at our staff and we begin working on that. So we have my approach has always been through the 3 following methods: self-assessments, manager assessments, and third-party assessments. So I'm going to walk through that a little bit. Most of you have likely seen the self-assessment manager assessment methodology. It comes about in different forms. What I tend to see is maybe a quarterly review process where an individual is asked to self-assess on certain traits. This is kind of where we sometimes see those soft skills maybe filter in a little bit, and then the manager will do the same. They'll sit down and meet, talk about any incongruity between those 2 assessments.
Jamison?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would this be along the lines of DISC or Myers-Briggs or some of the well-known tools?
Well, I think that's really when we start to talk about third-party assessments. So,
okay, I'll hold my question. Okay,
no, absolutely. I think we absolutely see that. So, there's this idea of saying individuals can self-assess, managers can assess, but ultimately we see a lot of folks start looking at third-party assessments, which I think are incredibly powerful. At Arterian, I utilized multiple third-party assessments. We even created one of our own internal technical assessments to inform certain skills. We wanted to know technically what the aptitude was around a bunch of Microsoft products,
Sure.
and around networking, and we'd issue a recruit. It was usually focused on pre-employment, not current staff, so I'd say that was problematic to start. We didn't have a baseline understanding of where our current staff would have tested themselves. We created a test to try to understand what our incoming potential team members would look like, our candidates. We also did third-party assessments. We tended to use the third-party assessments on our internal staff and then a little bit with recruits, and those were more along the lines, Harry, of what you're talking about. We utilized DISC, we utilized Myers-Briggs. There were a couple others that were pretty powerful for us that we like to use, and while they were very useful, I struggled. I struggled because they tended to be very specific in terms of what we were measuring, right? They weren't holistic in terms of everything, all the hard and soft skills I wanted to know about an individual. It was giving me some personality insights, some soft skill insights, and it also typically got delivered in a PDF. So I had a limited amount of data about one individual, and it was complicated, to say the least, to really put all of that data together in a way that I could take a top-down view perspective of my whole staff and understand where do I stand. And typically that happened with a combination of a third-party consultant and Microsoft Excel. So I would do these third-party assessments. I'd have recruits coming in that were doing aptitude assessments, technical aptitude assessments, and ultimately it was very, very complicated to keep that data alive. So I encourage you, as you think about how you measure the skills of your people against the requirements of your organization, to really there's some real nuggets and some value in there. What tends to happen, we see it over and over again, is folks get a test back, they get a PDF back, and then they put it away. So find a way to organize that data and keep it alive, because that's the data that's important to understand. As soon as you understand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and just from my own experience, having, in particular, Myers-Briggs is probably the one I spent the most time with, but Jamison, in a funny way, it kind of came back and said I was largely unemployable. So, basically I needed to be an entrepreneur, and I think a lot of our listeners resemble that remark. And so that's cool. And then it's interesting to do it over time. To your point, I do like a snapshot in time. And finally, Jamison, when I was in IT consulting with a large regional accounting firm in the Northwest in the 90s, in particular, before I broke off on my own, they were very cool about the fact that, maybe their opportunity was a train station in life, and you needed to go do your own thing. You needed to go start your own company. And I've always kind of wanted to be that manager. Right, and I'm getting a little far afield, but the Myers-Briggs can generate that someone can say, hey, I need to go start my own company. And I've tried to be that manager, like, right on, no hard feelings, right on. And the company I worked for, them in Bellevue, and they were that way, and I hope I resemble that. But please continue.
I think it's very interesting. I think first of all, it's getting an understanding of. First, there's a huge piece that comes across oftentimes when we look at gaps between a self-assessment and manager assessment. There's this whole idea of self-awareness, right? So self-awareness is literally a skill a lot of people want to understand across their staff, and having somebody do a self-assessment on self-awareness is a bit problematic. So that's often a place where we would find through DISC or Myers-Briggs or third-party assessments, or literally through huge differences in a self-assessment and manager assessment, a lack of self-awareness, which is informative. We would find personality traits, Harry, like you mentioned in DISC and Myers-Briggs, that said, you're better off, or you either completely on your own in a where you're very independent in a manager position, in an employee line employee position. There's a lot you can learn about yourself. But I want to bring back that focus that what we're really trying to focus on here is how does your organization take all of that data, and now you're measuring skills and competencies that directly relate to phase one of building that competency framework. We're looking at every individual skill that's relevant for the company, every department, every team, down to as granular as every role, and saying, I know exactly what I need to understand for every person. As soon as I understand what their level of skill level or level of competency is as it relates to our framework, we begin to see, it comes to light very quickly where we have gaps. Obviously, if you have a requirement for a high level of budget analysis, like budgeting in your financial team, you require a high skill level, let's say on a 1 to 5, you need it to be a 5. We're doing a bunch of work to capitalize our future growth. We need an incredible amount of financial planning acumen to be successful. And then you have 2 people on the financial side and literally no experience there, you're likely to fail. Now that I may have presented an example there that seems obvious, but when you understand the breadth of skills and competencies across your org and measure this, gaps will come to light that may not be so obvious. And those skill gaps are exactly what are going to keep you from being successful as a business. It's important to understand that. And it becomes more dramatic on the technical side of things if you are shifting what you do as an organization, like I did with Arterian, moving from premise-based infrastructure to cloud-based infrastructure. Not only a change in the technology we're using to serve our clients, but adding completely new high business value lines of business to keep our revenue and margins where they were when we weren't doing that kind of work. So we made that entire strategic shift, and had to quickly look at our staff and the skills of our staff and say, what do we need to start working on and changing? Where do we need to hire new people? Where can we upskill existing people in alignment with their skills, their passions, where they desire to learn, all of those pieces to be ahead of the game? Because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can't take your organization, your biggest asset, again, it's your people. You cannot, as an organization, snap your fingers and say we're going to do something else and just expect the people to follow. They have to have the skills to get there, and you need to help them acquire those skills. So again, we see so many organizations focus on training, focus on specific skills while hiring without doing this analysis first. Where are my gaps? Where are my biggest gaps? Let's focus on the things that are going to keep us from being successful. So once we've identified the gaps, I mean, this is where it matters. Now we can actually utilize a vastly more objective, informative set of data to understand where we're going to miss, where we're likely to miss in being successful. And now we can work on closing those gaps. So first of all, in organizations, and certainly the larger the organization, the more we see this being a problem, is simply putting people in the right seat. If we have absolute clarity on everybody's skill level as it's relevant to their organization, we may find a help desk engineer who'd be better being on dispatch, or better as an account manager, or somebody who's working in the warehouse who'd be better, talking to customers in a customer service role. We find that all the time. And organizations who've spent time building a culture within their teams would much rather put people in the right seat to be successful in alignment with their skills and passions than lose those people and then go to try to hire somebody into that. It's a vastly more expensive exercise than simply realigning people to where they need to be. So identifying where people's skills are and then taking a fresh, clean look at that can be quite eye-opening. Second is, how do we skill? It's always better to move the skills of your existing staff up than replacing them with new employees, right? For several obvious reasons: cost, loyalty. There's just a lot of culture. Absolutely, probably the number one reason. It's better to move your people up than replace them wherever that's possible. So it's once you understand where people's skill gaps are and you know where they desire to learn and skill up, that informs training. If I know that I have, a significant gap in my ability to do VMware projects, and I know that I have 6 engineers who have a little bit of skill there, but they really would like to learn more, it's very easy for me to identify a training opportunity where I have people who are anxious to move in a direction that the company needs more skills. So collect that data. That's really critical to learn, especially as your organization grows and scales. Mentoring, the same kind of thing. If you have folks who are highly skilled, particularly if they're really passionate about what they do, they're great mentors for the organization. And if you identify folks who are lower skills but they really wish to learn, let's pair those people up and mentor to skill up. So really, really focus on that skilling up. And I'm really moving from low-hanging fruit to where short-term low-hanging, immediately you can optimize. You move from optimizing to how you focus on skilling up. Ultimately, you always have to have a hiring pipeline. And in the hiring pipeline, focus on people who have the skills you're going to require in the future. Not today, but in the future. Bring them in, get them aligned with your culture, and ensure that they have the skills and competencies that are driving what you've planned for 2 or 3 years from now. That's really critical. I see far too often, far too often, folks say, we are shorthanded, there's too much work. We need to hire a new fill in the blank job, and then they make up a job description and they list a paragraph of the type of people we want and some skills without really ever doing the strategic analysis of where their gaps are and the skills that they need to be hiring for. And it's a classic mistake. They're adding to skill set that might even be not even a gap in their organization. They're just literally adding people because they're stressed under workload. It's really critical that you do the strategic analysis for that reason. And then finally, it's becoming rampant in our industry. We're seeing it all the time. It is absolutely a major part of my exit strategy for Arterian was I built value around a competency in cloud computing. We were extremely good at Microsoft Cloud, and we not only did we have the technical aptitude, but we had an actual cultural mindset around the paradigm shift that is cloud computing and what Microsoft was up to. That was valuable when I sold my business. So the company that acquired me was a rather mature company. They were great training programs to optimize people or to skill people up. They were smart around their job positions. They had a HR, a VP of human resources who knew exactly what type of skills they need to hire for. But their growth strategy was through acquisitions, and those acquisitions weren't just purely acquiring revenue, it was acquiring talent that covered future skill gaps. It's a strategic acquisition, and I think the majority of folks online right now are thinking about what is our future value, what's our exit strategy, what's potential. That was absolutely front of mind for me over the last 5 years, and building a valuable set of skills in terms of a potential buyer really did increase the value of the organization. So I just want people to hang on that a little bit. Harry, let me ask, do we have any questions? I just ran through kind of the steps 2 and 3 there. Has anybody asked any questions yet?
We do not. And again, that's not a negative. We can view it a couple of different ways in the affirmative. A, you're doing a great job. B, the nature of the conversation is just more thought-provoking. Folks, if you do have questions, please ask them. But again, I get it. If today is a day to just be a sponge and soak it up, Jamison.
That's fine. Yeah, not a problem. I just thought I'd check before we jump on to the next slide, which is for AppRiver. So, Harry, I'm going to hand it back over to you real quick.
Okay, well, thank you. So, Justin, sir, are you out there in the wild, wild west?
I am online and ready to rock and roll.
And actually, you're in the wild, wild east, right? You're down in Florida.
Yeah. Well, we're down in Florida, but it's definitely southeast. We're in the Gulf Coast area, so we're closer to New Orleans than we are to Orlando.
Well, sure. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for being a long-time community supporter. You and I recently caught up, and boy, howdy, we were reminiscing about the good old days, the SMB Nation, the SMB Nation conferences, and so on. And you know, I appreciate you having a special place in your heart for that. For those on the line that I know you'll get to it, who is AppRiver and all that, but let me ask you a different question: Is you guys doing okay down there after the hurricane and all that?
Yeah. After the hurricane, you know, the only thing that kind of freaks us out is the fast ones, and this one was an extremely fast-moving hurricane. So those are the ones that kind of freak everyone out. But luckily, it ended up being kind of a big bunch of nothing on that one. So we were pretty lucky.
Yep. I understand today you have a video that we want to show, so perhaps we should jump into that. Did you have some comments you'd like to make, my friend?
Oh, no, sure. No. I'll let you do that, and we can chat afterwards.
Okay. So, Jenny, over in the control room, if we're good on the video. There.
Yeah, I sure am. I'm here.
Okay, great. Always, you know, it's always a little bit like going to a church potluck or a social club potluck, and you have mystery meat when you work with some of these platforms, right? You gotta.
Yeah.
You got to just do a sound check, as it were. But hey, Justin, before we let you go, I realize it's a little bit later in the day, but Farzad probably doesn't know this over at Fortinet, but sir, if you want to hop a plane and have lunch with us next Tuesday down in Sunnyvale, California, I've extended the invitation. So that'd be great.
Well, yeah, that's really nice. Unfortunately, I think you know, my team might miss me a little bit here. They don't like to let me go.
For another day, but I think the three of us could do some damage. Ron Hardy was saying, Ron Hardy, we will get you the links to replay the videos. He could not hear the sound on his computer speakers. So Ron, we'll cover off on you for that. We have a poll up. The question is, which of the following was your most important consideration when selecting an Office 365 vendor? Folks, you have several choices. Please go ahead and cast your vote. Justin, will you be at any of the what show are you aware of you'll be at next? If you don't mind me asking, what industry conference, say in the next 10 days?
I won't be at one in the next 10 days. We're actually going to have a couple of our people from AppRiver at one of the big Microsoft events. It's kind of a Microsoft-only sort of event, and Tier 2s. That's next week. I will be at IT Nation, though, where we have kind of an exciting announcement that we're going to be bringing there. So if you're a ConnectWise partner, you know, we have some exciting stuff there.
Okay, and Jamison, I think you'll be at IT Nation. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will absolutely be a busy boy at IT Nation this year. Yes.
All righty. Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Maybe you guys can meet. Jenny, go ahead and close the poll. And Jamison, we're back to you, my friend. And thank you, Justin. Thanks for your support. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to basically start to wrap things up a little bit here by kind of walking back through, you know, what we covered, and hopefully there will be a question or two that come in off here. I'd be happy to elaborate on anything and give more examples. You know, what I'm hoping people take away from today is kind of this idea to take a deep breath, take a step back, and really determine the strategic functions that you need for today and tomorrow. Again, I very, very focused on the current mission of your company, and start with your values. I think too often, I really believe that too often, folks think of how do people adhere to values and what are their specific skills around a technical item like Azure Active Directory, for example, and they put them in entirely different camps. But if you utilize a framework like this, it's really all the same. It's understanding the complete relevant skills and competencies makeup of everybody in your organization. So determine the skills and capabilities required to be successful for today and tomorrow. Assess your team. The second mistake that we see a lot of folks make is they spend their time assessing only folks who are entering the organization, and they don't utilize this framework against their existing organization to understand the gaps. So really focus there, assess what you need, assess your team, identify your skill gaps. It will be crystal clear to you if you utilize, whether you use skill levels that are required in every level and then the skill levels of the individuals. There's obvious ways that you can begin to understand those gaps. Those gaps are keeping you from being successful. And if you're shifting in a direction that you see larger skill gaps, it's just going to be a larger impediment to your future success. Ultimately, we've seen a lot of this kind of fear out there around how quickly do I need to switch my IT services business from traditional premise-based to cloud. Start looking at this. This is really critical. It aligns well with this methodology. And finally, optimize, train, hire, acquire. Whatever it is you need to do to fill those gaps, the future of your company relies on the skills of your people. They're your greatest asset. And that's really the homework. I'm hoping people can take some of this data back with them and ponder it, and maybe approach a competency framework for their own organization.
Cool.
And Harry, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm hoping that there's that there might be a question or two out there. If there's not, then...
Well, you know what? We should have created a pop quiz, Jamison. We should have had a pop quiz, and they have to pass it to be able to graduate what we like to call fall semester. In fact, you know what? Jenny, make a note. Maybe we'll do that next year. We'll have a final exam. I kind of like the idea. But let's open it up for questions and maybe a dialogue. And Justin, if you're still on, you're welcome to come off mute and participate in this because, Jamison, if you haven't had the pleasure of working with AppRiver, they're very much about the business conversation, about the business model. And so, quite frankly, we have a little bit of extra time. We do have a question, and we can go around the horn on this one. It's from David Ham, and David is asking, forced rankings have become a popular employee performance evaluation approach in some sectors. Others find this approach to be divisive and distracting, particularly when applied to mixed discipline staff tiers. What is your perspective? Jamison, lead off.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. It's never been the goal of what we talk about to be divisive. There was an interesting, I'm going to step back a little bit. There's a whole 360 review process in stacked rankings at Microsoft. I think that's probably one of the more common examples.
Yeah, don't get me started, Jamison.
Yeah, I'm not going to get anybody started. But to Satya Nadella's credit, the culture there has shifted, and it continues to shift in a seemingly subjective, I'm not at Microsoft, clearly, in a significant way. I have a lot of friends who work there, and it's hard to steer a ship that big, right? I mean, this is no small task. But a big part of that was this review process that ultimately ended up in significant stack ranking. Also upward, it became almost anecdotally a tool for punishment, and that was never the intended purpose. It was just the way that elements of the culture began to use it. I'm not picking on Microsoft. I think we see that a lot in multiple organizations, and therefore people looked at ways to shift away from that. So my focus here in this exercise is not so much to punish or reward individuals. Certainly the data could be utilized in such a way, but to literally take a very objective view of what are the skills in our organization today, what are the skills of the people we have, how do we put people in the blender, get them on the right seat. Like if we could optimize internally and then begin upskilling where they're passionate. And ultimately, yeah, there may be people who don't really match any of the skill requirements for your organization, and they don't have any passions or interests that align with the direction your company is headed. Well, it's not just, it's not about a stack ranking exercise to remove people, but ultimately we all have to also face the music there a little bit. I had people who just simply didn't have the skills and didn't want to learn in a place that mattered to my business, and it was helpful for both of us to separate and go our own positive ways. I helped them find their new career. That's my soft.
Jamison, you can fire me any day, my friend. It would be an honor. I'll add a little value here if I can. A lot of times when I'm presenting the capabilities of my company or companies I represent, and there's a lot of questions a client wants. It's a job interview, Jamison, basically.
Yep.
And I'm like, guys, I don't know if I'm good at managing people. I mean, hopefully I'm authentic and I am who I am, but something I've taken pride in, Jamison, quantitative aside. I mean, I get quantitative, trust me, but maybe more over in the qualitative side. Something I was proud of is back in the boom, as I call it, back in the day, we had an average SMB Nation tenure of, at one point, right around 7 years. That's back when I was peaking at about 12 to 14 employees. And, Jamison, I had to amortize some misfits. We would have the 6-week probation, and sometimes, neither of us made a good decision to work together. Now, fortunately, Jenny Hallmark is, finishing up 10 years, so that helped a lot in the basic math to skew it up. But I don't know, that's something I take a great deal of pride in, that, I've never thought of myself as a hardcore HR manager and measurements and reports, and I should do more of that. But to me, the measurement was one of them. One that's important to me is tenure. Let me get a question out of this. What value do you place on employee tenure in an organization?
Well, I think it's critical to culture, right? I mean, it's certainly there's tribal knowledge that's important. Of course, that can also have some reverse effects if culture as well, right? I mean, sometimes change is healthy, but I think tenure absolutely matters. I mean, if you have the right culture and the heart of the company sits in your people, then tenure becomes critical. I think that and ultimately, if there's an alignment between the passions and interests of an employee to the organization, and there's a good cultural match there, tenure is absolutely critical. I went through significant turnover at my peak, mostly through an acquisition that was suboptimal. My third acquisition, I acquired 4 companies before I sold.
Yep. I remember that.
Yep, and that fourth acquisition was or third/fourth, they were kind of together in one. It was unhealthy, and so I had what I would call positive turnover, even though it was unfortunate and complicated and difficult, and it was for the sake of the culture. But it did destroy my stat around tenure. That's for sure.
See, look at that. You got to watch those Sunday football stats. That quarterback ranking, my friend. That quarterback
That's right.
ranking. Okay, got a couple questions. This is probably more rhetorical from Ron Hardy out of Gig Harbor, Washington, just down from me. He says, point well taken, Ron. Excuse me. Final exam question: how much money did you make last year, and how much were you able to keep? We'll call that a rhetorical question, but it's a good question. I can tell you, I just had to look that in the eyes because I, like many entrepreneurs, took the tax extension, and guess what Monday was, Jamison? October 16th.
The day.
It was TurboTax Day, my friend. I looked that one right in the eye.
I beat it by a week.
Look, yeah. So, but let's take Ron's question at face value. How much did you make, and how much were you able to keep? How does that weave into the fabric of your teaching, preaching, and methodology?
Well, if we're talking about, so there's a couple different ways I can think about the question. I mean, literally pointed at me, but in terms of the topic for the day, there's a lot you can do with this data. So I'm gonna actually come back and actually talk just for a second about compensation. So we were pretty good at Arterian, thanks to an outsourced HR person. We used a company called Swift HR in Seattle. I'm good friends with Shannon Swift, who owns it. And we had an outsourced HR person, Kat, who, when we understood, when we had people aligned in the right, with the right competencies and the right roles, we had salary bands that that we could measure people. So the reason I come to that is because when we utilize a good competency framework, we align people in the right roles. It was a great thing for culture, because we began to have very explicit rules around where somebody would be in a certain role and why they would have compensated, what band they'd be compensated in that role. So your role would determine the band, and then your tenure would determine where you sat in that band. And it was a really objective way to approach it that was entirely logical and took a whole lot of the strife out of, why is this person getting paid more than me? Anyway, I know that wasn't the nature of the genesis of the question, but it was relevant to the topic in that sense. So it was definitely an important factor.
Yeah. Boy, that we'll get you back winter quarter maybe and talk about compensation. That's a good hour, and it's a whole nother hour. Hal Hostetler had to leave. He says, many thanks, excellent presentation. We're back with David Ham. David says to Jamison, you have emphasized skills, but I didn't hear you mention strengths. For example, as evaluated by third-party strengths finders, evaluations from Gallup, how do you value such core strengths into employee evaluations relative to skills?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And to be fair, I could take strengths, skills, competencies, capabilities, and for the sake of how we measure this, I'm putting them all in one bucket. So it's a very fair question. Strengths Finders, interesting. I know multiple organizations use Strengths Finder. There's so many third-party assessments that start to assess all these things. If you've identified, I will go back to that competency framework and literally say those strengths are just pieces of competencies, right? So if there's a competency around customer centricity and Strength Finder has elements that align with customer centricity, great, measure those. If those are critical to your organization, what I've found is if you've done a good job in looking at strengths, skills, competencies, capabilities, whatever you want to call them, to build your framework, and you identify third-party assessments that you feel have a validity and inform multiple skills, strengths, what have you, put in that bucket that are relevant to your organization, then they're great ways to begin informing those skills. So short answer, when I use the word skills, I mean all of the above.
Okay, and that's fair. And thank you, David Ham, for the question. Great question. Ron Hardy is back. He says, your points regarding hiring and gaining expertise that is forward-looking is well taken. Thanks. So a shout out, but if you want to reiterate your philosophy, yeah, that's cool too.
No, appreciate it. I think I've beat that one pretty good. I think the one thing I might reiterate a little bit there though is particularly around, let's really focus on technical skills. I think that I know we're speaking to a vertical industry right now, and it's the vertical industry I've been in for 21 years, and there's frankly, Harry, I think you'd agree with me, there's a fair amount of fear right now about the changing tide, and the comfort that I felt in the planning and exercises I did around saying, what do I look like in 5 years? What does my org look like in 5 years? And getting ahead of that, it literally let me sleep better at night, and I think it plays exactly into what I'm talking about. It's an investment. It is undeniably that's frightening too, right? How do I hire somebody who may be only moderately helpful today, but I know that they're bringing me the skills I'll need tomorrow? It's you got to suck it up and make that investment to survive, and to not just survive, but to thrive. And that was absolutely what we were successful in doing. And so I appreciate the comment. I'm glad it was helpful.
Well, and I'll tell you, we're out of questions, so I'm going to dovetail that. And Jamison, what I like to say, and there's truth to humor, is, man, I'm tired of being broke. I'm tired of being broke. You know what I mean. I want to. I can't roll back to 2007, right? I can't roll back a decade. So I got to change my behavior going forward. But boy, howdy, that was a decade, my friend. I like to triple whammy, right? The pivot to cloud, small business server went away, and don't forget the Great Recession.
Yeah,
and,
it was a doozy.
Yeah, but the good news is we're all here, and everybody should take a great deal of pride in that. With that said, Jamison, I think we're going to allow people to get back to the salt mine 15 minutes early today. So, folks, thanks for joining us for fall semester. This has been a 6-lecture series. Jamison was 2 of them. We'll be back for winter quarter, spring, summer, and fall quarters. So we're shifting our academic calendar to the quarterly system. Ron Hardy, I'm gonna take under advisement your observation on we will do a final exam. Jamison, it'd be fun to get these people a certificate, right? Suitable for framing after the quarter. Jamison, I look forward to seeing you this fall somehow, some way at the various shows or when you're back in Seattle. Thank you for your time. And then finally, Fortinet and AppRiver. Folks, give them a fair shake. It's what makes this possible and how we can present academic content. With that said, have a fantastic day.